All right, we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming. We have folks today registered from across the entire United States as well as internationally, actually. And so to welcome you all. My name is Moira Kelly, and I am the president of EXPLO. We are a nonprofit organization founded 46 years ago, actually in the halls of MIT. Our founder actually was an administrator at MIT. And we run academic enrichment programs for students in grades 4 through 12 on campuses in Massachusetts and New York. And we have 87,000 alums from 91 countries who've gone on to some pretty remarkable things. And they've been pushing the boundaries in research and medicine and law, business, arts, and engineering. We've got Rhodes Scholars. We've got people who've won Pulitzer Prizes. I mean, all sorts of things. And I wouldn't necessarily draw it back specifically to EXPO, except to say, when you're around really creative people who are pushing boundaries on a regular basis, it's pretty inspiring. And someone asked me today, why after all the years that I've been working at EXPO do I stay? And it's really because of the people. So we are here today with Lindsay Cohen, who I've known for a while, and she's a senior consultant and director of professional development with Spark Admissions. And Spark Admissions is one of the leading college counseling firms in the nation. And prior to her work at Spark, Lindsay taught at Harvard College. And there, she was actually awarded the Derek Bach Award for Distinguished Teaching, which is really something. So she earned her PhD in history at Brandeis, and she earned her undergraduate degree from Tufts. And Lindsay, I just want to thank you for joining us this evening. At the height of, well, maybe it's post May 1st, right? So maybe you have a little tiny break, but thank you for coming. So prior to the pandemic, competitive college admissions were already changing, and with the pandemic, it seems like college admissions, particularly for really competitive institutions, or let's just say generally competitive institutions, doesn't even have to be really competitive, that it's really been disrupted. Schools went test optional. There was an explosion in applications for top schools. The admit rate in many schools dropped, sometimes fairly precipitously. And many people, including college counselors, have told me that it just feels like the rules are really changing. And today, Lindsay, just so you know, we've got families with us who have children who are entering grades 11 and 12. We also have an interestingly large number of students who are parents who have children in grades 8 and 9, but we also have parents who have children in grades 4 through 7. There is no doubt a lot of concern and stress around this whole college admission process. And one of the things that I'm hoping for today with you is that you, who do this work all the time and have been doing this for years, can share your wisdom, shatter some myths, and just generally help families contend with this new world and answer their questions. So folks, Lindsay's going to do a presentation. Then we are going to have a Q&A session, and the chat, for those who haven't heard this, has been disabled, and you can put your questions or comments into the Q&A session. And as we go through, we will try and answer as many as possible. We are recording this webinar and we'll send it out after we're finished. And with that, Lindsay, I'm just going to pass it along to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all of you for being here. My name is Lindsay Cohen, as you heard, and I'm a senior admissions consultant and direct professional development at Spark Admissions, which is an admissions consulting firm outside of Boston, but I work with students all over the country and all over the world. And I'm a big fan of EXPLO and all of the students who come through. So I'm delighted to be able to speak to all of you today and to hopefully address many of your questions, allay some of your concerns about the college admissions process, which might seem like it has been completely altered by the pandemic and the ways that that changed our world. But as I think you'll see, a lot of things are the same. While I will certainly speak to some of the changes in the past couple of years and give you a clear sense of what mattered before COVID. I will also give you a sense of what matters after COVID, and you'll probably see that a lot of those things are the same despite kind of the changing climate. And then I will be happy to answer specific questions. I appreciate, I understand, I deal with this every day. I know that there is a lot of confusion relevant to the college admissions process, and I'm sure that many of you heard a lot of things about this particular admissions cycle, whether it was surprising or intensely competitive or very unpredictable. And I'm at least here to say that, a big goal of mine is to help families be informed and to understand the process. I think that it can take a lot of stress out of the process. And from my experience and across my firm, I was not particularly surprised with what we saw this year. There are some things certainly that are important trends for us all to be aware of, but I at least want to reassure you that there are a lot of things that are the same. I think that the big questions today that will frame a lot of my presentation for you are just, what do colleges really care about, particularly in the wake of the pandemic in the past couple of years? What are the things that matter, and what are admissions committees going to be looking for? And I do want to just reiterate at the outset that experts, myself among them, will tell you that colleges do not want to reinvent the wheel. As I mentioned, what I saw this year and last year was not particularly surprising, but I do want to be able to inform you all. So I'm going to do that through kind of some of the myths that I've heard recently, and then give you a sense of what the counter is to those myths on several points related to the admissions process. Okay, so the first thing that I hear from families a lot lately is that, let me just minimize this, is that it seems like no one gets into college anymore. I hear this a lot. And let me just reiterate that colleges are still mostly looking for what they have always wanted: good grades, good scores, community engagement, and well-written essays. But let's talk for a moment about the pandemic and the way that it did make college admissions more competitive. So there's a few things to keep in mind. First of all, as many of you probably know, because of the inaccessibility to testing, colleges across the board dropped the testing requirement, which seemed to open up a lot more schools to a lot more students. And they applied to a lot more schools across the board. So that was one really important reason why there were just more applications. The other thing is that students couldn't visit schools during the pandemic. So there wasn't sort of that filter of being able to see a school and know whether or not they might have been interested in applying. So they applied to more schools. There was also the very important and significant ways that colleges are trying to broaden and diversify their applicant pool. And so there were just many more students. There was also, right in 2020, a lot of schools accepted more students because they weren't sure what it was going to look like during the pandemic. And as a result, a lot of schools still remain over-enrolled. And so there just aren't enough spots. There are some schools that are even trying to decrease the size of their class. So in reality, it's a numbers thing. There are many more students and the schools are not getting larger, and some of them are actually trying to get smaller. And that really happened significantly from the pandemic. So that's why it has just seemed to have changed so much. I would say that, given these changes, when is the best time to start thinking about college applications? This is a question that I get a lot. The biggest advantage that you have in this process is always time. And the reason for that is because you can start to develop and do the kinds of things that are really important and that will bring value to this process. Everything that you do, that a student does in the summer before high school, counts. It all is part of the college application, all things that you can include. So it's wonderful to be able to start early to get a sense of the things that you're interested in, which I will say more about, so that you can do things that are valuable and that will be valuable to your admissions process. This is certainly not to say that every single thing that you do in high school should be with the college admissions process in mind, but I think what starting early allows you to do is figure out the things that are most exciting to you and then be able to develop them in a way that will be meaningful to your college admissions process. So myth number 2. Grades are not as significant because of COVID. So this is a question that I get a lot because, understandably so, there were so many challenges with remote learning. There were so many challenges with the school year being interrupted. And I do want you to know, any students who were in school during that time, admissions officials understand, everybody understands that it was just an unprecedented time, and those years are certainly contextualized in that way. So I want you to be very reassured in that sense. With that in mind, grades are and always have been the most important factor in the college admissions process, and colleges still care very, very much about them. And that is grades from freshman year until senior year when you submit your grades. You apply early, which I can speak more to, or just first semester, and then continuing oftentimes to submit any grades after you graduate, after you've been admitted. Some schools do not look at freshman year grades, but I still feel that it's always important. Most schools do. So students, you want to kind of hit the ground running when you start high school, which is another reason why it can be nice to think about this in the earlier years. The most important grades in high school that colleges care about are the grades in your academic courses. And so this is what I've flagged for you here, the unweighted GPA. An unweighted GPA is the cumulative grade point average in your typically five academic courses. So English, history, science, math, and foreign language. And the reason why colleges really look exclusively at those grades is because, and I work with students all over the world, every high school calculates GPA differently. Every high school has a different curriculum. So in order for colleges to evaluate applicants against one another, they have to have an equal bar. So that's why they really look at an unweighted GPA, which is the first thing that I always look at with students. That said, one of the really important factors alongside of that unweighted GPA, and something that's increasingly important, particularly after remote learning and in the context of a test optional policy, which I'll talk more about, is that colleges care a lot about the rigor of a student's courses. How challenging are the classes that you're taking? Colleges like to see students challenging themselves. If a ninth grade student has all A's in his or her classes, they're going to expect that that student might try to level up in some of those classes the following year. It is very important. Balance is important. And I talk to students and families all the time about finding that balance and challenging themselves in the courses that are going to be the most meaningful to them, and making sure that the grades will still stay strong. But that is always an important factor. I always work with students also to think about how they can increase rigor and show intellectual curiosity outside of school and outside of the classroom as well. And one other factor I want to mention about grades is this idea of academic momentum, which is students improving over time. Colleges love to see growth. They love to see progress. Who you are as a ninth grade student is very different from who you are as an 11th grade student or a 12th grade student. And when you improve over time, that's very, very meaningful. So oftentimes I tell students that really the most important grades are those full year grades from junior year and a little bit of senior year, because that's where colleges really know who you are as you're applying. The other thing is that interruptions. Everybody has interruptions in life. We all had a very large collective interruption in our education from COVID, but there are other things obviously that can affect and interrupt academics. And there's always space in the application to contextualize that and help colleges understand any particular grades that might be outliers in your performance for any particular way. This is a big one. This is one that I get a lot of questions about all the time. The SAT does not matter anymore. So as you know, with the pandemic, many schools stopped requiring scores. This was a very big deal. The SAT, the ACT is always being a big rites of passage in this process. So it was very significant for so many schools, the top schools, to drop this requirement. And prior to the pandemic, many schools had been test optional previously. So it was not a completely new phenomenon, but just to have no schools requiring it was very significant. So what does that mean now? I mean, first of all, as I've written here, scores are just one part of your application, but the vast majority of colleges still accept them. So The UC schools, University of California schools, they are test blind, meaning that they will not look at scores if you submit them. But most other schools are test optional, which means that you can still submit a test score and that can still be part of your review process, part of your profile. And every school, it seems, has different policies, and there's test optional, there's requiring scores, there's a lot of fluidity around it. What I will say is most important are a couple of things. First of all, there is a strategy to determining what is the right test for you, figuring out, should you take the SAT, should you take the ACT, and then deciding whether or not testing seems like it will be a strength in your profile, in which case, how do you prepare for it? When should you take the test? How many times? What are your goals? What should your goal score be? These are all the kinds of conversations that I have with families about testing and the role that testing will play in a particular student's profile and process. I have had excellent students admitted to top schools in the country without submitting a score. It is not prohibitive not to have a score if a student is otherwise competitive in all other ways. However, having a score is helpful. The data point is still helpful. So I would recommend at least trying for the score, kind of going for the testing, and again, seeing the role that it can play in your process. The SAT, as I've noted here, and this is, maybe important for parents, certainly has changed a lot since I took the SAT. It's changed a lot, both in content and scoring. And the curve has led to very, very high scores. Top schools in the country are really looking for perfect scores in a lot of ways. But what I want to balance that out with is the reality that this is now also a test that students can study for. And so that does mean, again, that starting your preparation early, reasonably early, and that's definitely something to think about, preparing properly and making it a reasonable part of your process is really important. Don't let the testing overtake everything, but certainly think about how it can factor into your process and how, if and how, I would say it can be a strength. Myth number 4, I need to be good at everything to get into college. So this is a very significant one for a couple of reasons. When I applied to college, colleges were looking for the Renaissance man, the student who was in every club, who did every single thing, who is just kind of solid across the board. These days, for all of the reasons that we have talked about, and even before COVID, there are so many more students applying to college, and colleges are looking for well-rounded student bodies. So they're not looking for well-rounded students. They're actually looking for pointy students who have developed a clear intellectual passion in high school and pursued that inside and outside the classroom. So this is really important, a couple of things. Because there are so many students applying to schools, one of the things that admissions offices do is to pool students by field. And by that, I mean, they might review all of the chemistry applicants together, or all of the math applicants together, or computer science. There's so many computer science applicants these days, all of the computer science applicants together. So one of the ways that you can have a strategic advantage in the process is by being very strong in your field. Now, always remember, there are some fields, computer science, that will have many more applicants than other fields like the classics or linguistics. And remember, colleges are trying to have well-rounded student bodies and have all of the courses represented on campus. So there can be sort of some strategy in terms of thinking about your interests and how you apply. But I would say what's so important is just for students to start exploring and finding their interests as soon as possible. And that can also start to help you determine which schools are right for you and how you can map your interests and your passions onto those particular schools and programs. And that can happen in so many ways. It can happen through wonderful summer programs like EXPLO. It can happen through activities in your school. It can happen through other courses outside your school. So you really want to determine how to explore those interests through reading, through conversations, through any kind of media, and just start to ask the right questions to lead you to things that you will be interested in so you can develop that further. There are certain activities that colleges care about more than others. One of those is that they care very strongly, did so before the pandemic and certainly do so since, service and volunteering and being engaged in your community. Colleges care about that so much. Remember that they are evaluating applicants in terms of the kinds of citizens that they'll be on their campus. They're looking for people who are going to be engaged community members and going to care about the world around them. So volunteering and community service, substantive volunteering and community service is so important. Colleges also care a lot about leadership. They like to see students who find something they're passionate about and take initiative and pursue that and can lead others towards those interests as well. So those are two things that I work with students to find good opportunities that are exciting for them in those two arenas. Consistency and commitment is really what is so important for all of these things. Of course, if you're starting high school, you might not know exactly what you're interested in, and your interests and passions might evolve over time, and that's okay. And you should also know that whatever you apply or pretend to apply in your application or promise to apply in your application, you do not necessarily have to pursue that. It's a way for you to know what you're interested in while you're in high school, and then you can get to the right institution for you and pursue any number of things. But colleges will want to see that you have had a consistent interest and been committed to some quality activities while you're in a high school and developed a story that is interesting and shows who you are when they're reviewing your application. Oh, it's right on the precipice of summer. This is a wonderful thing to highlight. My summer activities do not count. That is just not true. Summer is a wonderful time for so many reasons. And I would say in the college admissions process, it is such a great time to take advantage of the summer, take advantage of a more flexible schedule without kind of the challenges of classes and homework. And it's one of the best times to try and do different things that will excite you and bring value to your story in the college admissions process. So what are, some ways that you can really have a rewarding summer? So it's a time when you can really explore your interests. For example, in an EXPLO program, you can take a look at something that you've just discovered that you love and pursue it more in depth. You can do a lab internship. You can do an interesting travel program that has an academic component. I always encourage students to pursue community service opportunities during the summer that they might not have time for during the year, then to pursue it with even more time, right? To pursue it in a more, I tell students during the year that they should try to do maybe 2 hours a week for volunteering, and maybe they can do more during the summer and become more engaged. Always make the summer rewarding. Really think about something you're interested in academically, think about things you're interested in extracurricularly, think about your service. Make sure you find time for a break. I always tell my students that we're putting together a summer plan. Think about academics, extracurriculars, make sure you get a little bit of space for a break. And bear in mind that there are some opportunities that are better than others. There are so many things that are out there, and all of them can be great experiences. But you only have so much time, and you only have a few summers when you're in high school. So I would certainly want you to think about and ask experts, what are the great programs to really participate in during the summer that will both be growth opportunities for you and that will once again bring value to your college admissions process when the time comes. So you do want to be very strategic about that. Myth number 6, colleges don't want visitors because of COVID. So this has been a very significant question as well, whether or not colleges care if you visit or not, and how you can kind of engage with colleges in a formal way. So the reality here is very, very important. As colleges focus more heavily on their yield to manage their enrollment, determining which applicants are interested has become increasingly crucial. So let me first just pause there and explain what the yield is, what the college's yield is. When colleges accept a number of students, whatever students they accept, they want the percentage of those accepted students who enroll to be very high. That is their yield. And the reason why they want that number to be very high, just to simplify it, is because if the higher their yield, that can factor into their rankings. It's one of the data points that affects the school's ranking. And these schools are wonderful, brilliant, intellectual communities. And they're also businesses, and they do want their ranking to be high. And colleges are increasingly sensitive to this idea of yield. So one of the ways that they help their yield is by trying to determine which students are really interested in us, which students are likely to attend if we admit them. So certainly visiting schools is one of the ways that you can show colleges that you are interested in them. Does that mean that, now that the world is a little bit more open, you should be flying all over the country and seeing every single school? No, there are some schools that care about this more than others. The process of kind of showing interest in schools is generally referred to as demonstrating interest. You want to demonstrate interest in your schools. And there are many ways. So there's visiting, there are virtual opportunities to engage with schools, there are virtual interviews, I have a whole process for how you can show interest in schools. Applying early, which I'll talk about also, applying early decision in a binding way. So when you apply early decision, student signs a contract and parents sign a contract and guidance counselor at school signs a contract saying if the student is admitted, he or she will attend. And that, of course, is the greatest show of interest because you have essentially committed to going to that school. So that's a big way that you can show interest as well. Writing very meaningful essays for why you want to go to a school shows interest. So all of these things can help convince schools that you are interested, and it can help your chances of getting in. And I don't just want it to be from kind of a strategic perspective. Quite honestly, it also really helps you really get to know the school and decide whether or not it's a good fit for you. So there's a lot of important benefit there. One of the things that we really saw this year and last year because of the pandemic is that colleges are also trying to protect their yield in interesting ways. First, by not admitting students who are, you would think, just looking at the straight data, you would think are so competitive for them. But colleges will look at these very competitive, wonderful, talented students and think, we are probably not their first choice. And so they waitlist them or they do not admit them to try to protect their yield. So you have to be very careful to show interest to all of your schools, not just the schools that you might be most excited about, but the schools that your counselor might have deemed as a likely school or as a safety school, because those are the schools that might know that they are not necessarily your top choice or the one that you're applying early to, and they will not admit you to protect their yield. And as I always say to my students, my goal is for students to have options and to get into all of the schools that they are excited about. So I would strongly encourage you, when you are comfortable, when you are able, to do some visits for you and for the schools, and to really engage with them and get to know them in every way that you can, so you do show that interest. Some schools will say very clearly that they do not track interest. I still think that it can be useful to engage with them if for no other reason for your benefit. But there are also other schools that are very clear that they will track interest, and they are interested in knowing that you're interested in them. Myth number 7, nobody reads the application essays. This is something that I hear from a lot of families as well. Students spend so much time, important time, really working on these essays, really trying to convey who they are and what they have done in high school, their stories, personal stories, academic stories in their essays. And they always say, nobody's going to read this anyway. Well, I can tell you from my experience in admissions firms, from my experience in admissions offices, these colleges do read everything. They read every single thing in your application, I promise you. And the vast majority of colleges require not just the personal statement in the Common Application, which for those of you who know, the Common Application is the online portal, the online application that most schools accept with a few exceptions. But there's a personal statement where students can sort of write their own story. There are some prompts that they can respond to. And then every school has its own school specific essays. Some schools require 10 school specific essays. Some schools require 2, some require none. So it really depends. Regardless, essays are where admissions officers get to know you. It's where you breathe life and personality and energy and all of the things that make you uniquely you into your application. And I strongly encourage you to spend time on those essays and to write something memorable and exciting and wonderful that shows the qualities that you can imagine that admissions officers want on their campuses. Essays are also where you can make the argument that a particular school is right for you and that you are right for them. Sometimes I tell students that these essays can be like love letters to the school, right? You are the only one for me and I am the only one for you and we belong together. But in kind of a broader sense, it's where a student can really map themselves onto a school and say, I want to go here because this is the program that is perfect for me based on all of my experiences and based on what you're offering. That's a really important way to show interest, to also show that you've done your homework and you really know that this school is a good fit for you. So I think that's a really important opportunity as well. Make sure that your essays show your authentic voice, show who you are, show what makes you tick. Colleges are looking for that. They're looking for authentic 17-year-old voices. They just want to get to know you in that process. It is where admissions officers can really go to bat for you once they get to know who you are. And I would say, you want them to be very authentic. You want them to be very much a reflection of who you are, but also proofread them. And I always tell students, at least have one other person proofread them, make sure that they are the best kind of reflection of your writing. And students feel differently about the kinds of topics that they write about. I think it's helpful to, think about it through the lens of the admissions process, but still choose something that you're excited to write about and that you do think is authentically you. Number 8, we need a college admissions consultant. So, here I am saying to you, you certainly don't need a college admissions consultant to help you through the process. I think that school counselors do a wonderful job getting to know students and really advocating for them and helping them put together important materials for their applications. But a private counselor, particularly these days, can help a lot, which is why I work with so many students here and across the world. And the reason for that, there's a few things. There are many facets of this process. It can feel very overwhelming. I want to reassure you that it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be overwhelming. It's great to focus on the end result, which is that you're going to go to college. It's going to be wonderful. There are so many wonderful schools. I always like to sit with students as they're submitting their application and just reflect on the application itself, which is the accomplishment, all of these amazing things that you've done in 4 years in high school, which is always so impressive to me. But there are a lot of details in the process. There are the deadlines, there are gathering transcripts, there are letters of recommendation, there are when should I request scores, what are all of these moving parts in the interface and the common application itself. These are all things that a private consultant can help you with every step of the way, so it can just be as stress-free a process as possible. Private consultant can also offer you a lot of strategy, a lot of suggestions for the kinds of things that you're doing, a lot of expert advice about course selection and summer programs and extracurricular and narrative development, all of those points that I've mentioned. A lot of school counselors don't start working with students until junior year. And so since we've talked about today, one of the advantages you can have is if you start thinking about this a little bit sooner, it can be helpful to have someone who is helping you make the right choices in those earlier stages to set you up for success later on. At Spark, one of the things that's really important to us is that we really look at this as a growth process. And we really look at this as a partnership between us and with you on this journey in the admissions process. We want it to be a time of growth. We want it to be a rewarding time for you. And we want the process to be, as I said, as enjoyable as possible. I even find writing the essays very enjoyable as students discover their story and love some of the topics are a lot of fun to write about. But in my office, we are all veteran teachers and veteran advisors who just want to work with you to show all of your strengths and show all of your accomplishments in the process. And that is what I would want for all of you as you think about a private consultant and whether or not that's a good fit for you and your families. So with all of that in mind, let me just offer kind of a few important takeaways or some of the things that I think are most important to walk away from all of this with. And, the first thing is the importance of balance between academic rigor and grades. This is a big question, as I mentioned, that I get a lot. Grades will always be the most important thing, but you want to make sure you challenge yourself. So be careful about those choices you're making. Think about the classes that are most important to you in terms of your field, in terms of your interests, in terms of how you're applying. But I would try to show that intellectual curiosity and show that you are willing to take on a challenge and that you would like to challenge yourself, since that certainly shows that colleges would be excited to have that kind of curiosity on their campus. Remember the importance of consistency and commitment, and that students are separated into pools in the application process, and that the kind of pool that you are in that process can be important. You can be in, a pool that has many, many applicants, and certainly you want to be authentic to your interests. Or sometimes your interest might lead you to a smaller pool, which can be a little bit of an advantage. But the thing that's most advantageous at the end of the day is having a wonderful profile in whatever field you're in. So really developing that story over time, leadership and service, as I mentioned here, also so key part of that. So creating a foundation early that you can build on over time. So certainly this all speaks to the importance of an academic narrative and starting that early. And I don't want to overstate that, you have to decide before freshman year of college what you're going to do for the rest of your life. All you have to do is decide something that you're interested in the here and now, and then explore that over time through all of the ways that I've mentioned and through all of the programs that are available to you. And then if you'll get to a school that is a wonderful fit for you, and you can pursue any number of things that you get there. And remember that less is not more, but focus is significant. Colleges care about quality, not quantity. They want to see that you are committed to a few things that you're passionate about. They don't want to see you doing everything. They want to know who you are and what you're going to bring and what you're going to get involved in on their campus when you get there. So again, it doesn't mean that your interests can't change and evolve. That's part of what's so exciting about college and the college experience. But they want to see that you are the kind of student who wants to be involved and who knows how to get involved in things once you get there. And then how has the situation changed during COVID? So certainly the biggest thing is just the numbers. The numbers are outrageous. The number of applicants is just astounding. And so then the other side of that is that the admissions percentages declined so dramatically because schools just did not have space for all of these wonderful applicants. And that was very jarring, and we will probably see that to come for a few years as colleges adjust their enrollment, and hopefully some of the ways that there have been expanded applicants are here to stay. We don't know what will happen with testing. There are some schools that have remained test optional. Some schools are continuing to pilot a test optional program. Then we'll decide in a couple of years whether or not they will remain test optional. I am imagining that some schools are going to go back to requiring scores next year. So I do think that that's something to keep in mind also. But there are a lot of people applying to schools these days, and the schools are not bigger. And schools will always try to determine who is really interested in them. So please, take opportunities to get to know these schools, apply to schools that are right for you, but make sure that you are interested in all of the schools that you are planning to apply to, not just the ones that might be your top choice. Develop your story and your narrative as early as possible so you can really stand out in that process. Colleges are excited about interesting students who have passions. So the more that you can do, the more that you will stand out. And that has certainly been something that we've seen in very sharp relief over time. Colleges caring about students engaged in their schools, really engaged in their communities, who are leaders as well. And then just very strategically, as I referenced, the advantage of early decision, the importance of early decision in this process. There are different ways that you can apply early to school. There are different programs, and every school has different programs for early applications. Just to sort of zoom out briefly, college applications are due January 1st of a student's senior year. However, most schools offer an early application deadline around November 1st. They have different programs. You can apply early decision, which is that binding program I mentioned when you commit to going if you are admitted. You can apply early action, which is not binding. And then there are other kind of variations on that, like restricted early action or single choice early action. And they do change a lot, but the one that I want to highlight is early decision because it is binding. And choosing if and where to apply early decision is absolutely one of the most significant decisions that you make in the process, since you want to, as I call it, leverage your early decision currency in the best way possible to sort of boost you potentially into a school that is a very competitive place, but that will be very excited that you are applying in a binding way. You don't want to necessarily, risk your early decision currency by applying to a school that might not be the right fit. So you really want to think about it in the context of your list. And that's once again why, the targets and the likely schools, you want to make sure that you're showing interest to all of them. So if you do have them, I'm going to be happy to open this up and to answer questions. But if you do have further questions, my email is here, my office phone number. Please do feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help.
Oh, Lindsay, such good information. Yeah. So we got quite a few questions actually. And so I'm going to start actually with one that I think oftentimes this is a surprise for people when they hear about it, is about athletics and sports and the notion of recruited athletes and the proportion of competitive colleges where the incoming class is made up of not an insignificant portion of recruited athletes. And if you're one of those, that's wonderful. But if you're generally playing varsity sports, but you're not one of those, what does that mean? And does that really help you?
I really appreciate that question. I think it's a great question. It's a question that I get a lot. When it comes to athletics, and sports are wonderful. Sports are wonderful. It's teamwork. It's a great high school activity. And I know so many students love it. And I would never say to a student, you shouldn't do this. It's not bringing any value, because it's bringing value to your high school experience without question. If you are a varsity athlete, if you are a JV athlete, but if you are not an athletic recruit, colleges are not necessarily going to place value on the fact that you played a sport. However, if you play a sport consistently and then are captain of a team, that's a wonderful thing. That is one of those things that absolutely brings value to the process. I think that a lot of students sometimes think I have to play a sport because that's what colleges are looking for. So I want to say that no, that is not the case. If you are an extremely talented athlete and have been dedicating so much time and energy to your sport and are thinking about being recruited, that is another whole conversation. I work with recruited athletes in a kind of a different lane. But if you are a high school athlete and you love your sport, play your sport. But if it's something that you're doing because you think it's bringing value to the process, it's not. So, again, unless you might emerge as a leader later in your high school career.
Another question, Lindsay. I would say, earlier in time, when you were talking about maybe when you and I were applying to colleges, though you're a little bit younger than I am, it was being well-rounded altogether, and that's kind of changed. And it just seems so much more complicated now applying to competitive colleges. So one of the questions is, when should you start working with a college counselor to do this kind of work?
It's a great question. So I would say when you're ready. When you're ready is when you start working with a college counselor. I start working with some students in middle school, primarily so they can really hit the ground running when they get to high school and can take advantage of everything starting freshman year, right? As I mentioned, that summer before freshman year, everything going forward kind of are things that you can include on your application, but the things that you do in 7th and 8th grade can kind of set the foundation for that as well. So I would say that I start with a lot of students before high school, and some students want to acclimate to high school and then start just afterwards, perhaps sophomore year. I give students college lists pretty early in the process so they can take their time getting to know all of these schools and really narrow a list. So I think that there are a lot of reasons to start before high school, but if a student is not ready, then I would say early in the high school career is a good time to start. You're never too late. I mean, there's no kind of time when I would say, there's no value provided here. There's always time when there is value available or value provided by working with someone who's an expert in the field. But the sooner you can start, the sooner you are thinking and ready to start thinking about things that will bring value to your process, the better.
Lindsay, another question that's come up, and I've gotten this question a number of times from students is essays being quite important. Are there actually topics that you would consider taboo or encourage students to reconsider writing about them, even if a student feels that the topic has been a defining aspect of who they are, so that it might be writing about their mental health or anxiety, abuse, etc. That's a tough one. What advice would you give folks on that?
That's a wonderful question, and I really appreciate that question. I think what is always important to me when I'm working with students on their essays is that I do want them to feel that it is a space where they are sharing a story that is authentically them, and that they are sharing important aspects of who they are with admissions committees that admissions committees might not know from all the other aspects of their application. That said, I think it's always important for students to think about the ways that they can show all of their strengths and all of the positive things that they have experienced as well. Well, I don't want to say that there are some topics that are taboo. Every student should sort of feel inclined to express themselves in the way that is meaningful. I do think that college admissions committees want to hear about a student who is going to be, they want to hear about a student's creativity and curiosity and the things that really make them tick. If a student has had a challenging time and wants to mention that, I think that's absolutely important, but I don't think that that should necessarily define them either. If they feel so inclined to talk about their resilience as well and the way that they have responded to that and sort of how they can process that over time. I think that it's really important to bounce those delicate topics off of important people in your lives to sort of, ensure that you are telling a story that is meaningful to you and that will be very exciting in the process. But I also want students to feel seen and heard as well. I think that when it comes to more, if you want to say kind of taboo topics, so I hesitate to use that word, you also want to think about being very unique, right? And that you want to tell the most unique story that you can. And I would have advised students, you don't necessarily want to tell a COVID story. There might be other space for that. That's not necessarily, you might have a unique experience from COVID, so that might be a different situation, but many of us experienced various challenges through the pandemic. A lot of students might want to tell a story about a big game that they won in a sports event, and that's exciting and that's important, but think about many athletes who might be talking about a big game or a big event. So I would really focus on a story that is so uniquely to you and that shows so many sides of you and that shows, your passion and, as I mentioned, creativity and curiosity and your empathy, and try to tell a story that is a story of growth. And so if there has been something in your life that has been challenging, of course, I understand that, but think about the growth that came from that. Focus on that, because that in some ways becomes even the more interesting part of the story.
That's really helpful, Lindsay. Someone else is asking, what do you think incoming juniors should do to figure out what they want to do in college?
Incoming juniors, how did they figure out what they want to do in college? That's a question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, we get this a lot. I was meeting with quite a few families this winter and this spring, talking about, parents talking about the fact that when they went to college, they had no idea what they might want to pursue or study, and what students might do in high school to get an idea of that. I'm sure part of this is just the sheer cost of college is kind of making you wonder, how do we make this a good investment going forward?
So a bunch of things. I think summer enrichment programs are a perfect opportunity to try something on, right? See if it's something that you like, see if it's interesting. I mean, you can do that during the summer. Sometimes there are opportunities during the school year. I oftentimes give students light readings. What do you like to read? What do you like to watch? What class are you most enjoying at school? Kind of think a little bit about, if there is a particular class, what was the lesson that you liked most in that class? And then sort of elaborate on that a little bit. So if you were in history and you loved learning about World War II, what was interesting about that? Let's build on that, right? So start in the classroom in most cases, think about what's interesting, and then try to enrich around that, whether it's readings, whether it's summer enrichment programs or enrichment programs during the year. And then think about, go look at your school clubs, see, look at the activities that exist in your school. What interests you? Are you excited about a peer mentoring club? Are you excited about an investment club? Does something like the physics club really make you enthusiastic? Sometimes some of those things outside of the classroom can really make clear for a student what they're excited about. And then just kind of thinking about engagement in the world, right? Current events or any kind of media that you're consuming or any kind of content along those lines. Think about the things that are most interesting to you, and then talk to people, talk to teachers, talk to advisors about how to parlay that into an academic interest if there's something that you're interested in. I talk to students a lot about what it means to major in something in college, right? What that looks like. There are so many more disciplines in colleges that that students are often exposed to in high school. And what can be really exciting is to start to learn what those are and to start to learn how your interests might actually map onto those. So start in your classrooms, start in your school, and then build out from there and all of the programs and opportunities around you.
So it sounds like there's another question here, Lindsay, and I think it's related to this. Someone's asking, I'm a well-rounded student with multiple interests and activities. What should I do? And it's sounding like that's wonderful that you have all of these interests. Can you start focusing a little bit more? Can you start, and I'm always hesitant to have students specialize too early, but at the same time, kind of me being someone who is interested in loads and loads of things, is what are things that you might do? And I think that you answered that well, of like, work on trying to focus, to explore those things that really might light you up. Also getting questions about what about a job in high school? If someone, do colleges count having a job while in high school as an extracurricular activity versus volunteering?
So it's a great question. So in the Common Application, there is a section in the Common Application where you list all of your activities, the activities list, for lack of a better word. And there are categories that define your activities. There are many categories. One of them is community service. One of them is paid work. So if you do have a job, you can certainly list it as paid work and then describe it. I will say, just from an admissions perspective, and I'll contextualize this in different ways, service, there are some students absolutely who need to work to support their families and to support themselves. Colleges appreciate that. Paid work is very important and very valuable for many reasons. All things equal, colleges do really like to see service and do really like to see students who are engaged in service. So when families say to me, oh, well, he needs to have a job for his college application process, I will say, no, that's not necessarily true. It's not that that's something that they're looking for. If it's something that is important for other reasons, certainly that is very significant, and that's part of who the student is. If a student is interested in business or economics, sometimes paid work can be a really important part of that interest development profile. But at the end of the day, I do think that if I had to kind of rank, I would put service above paid work when all things are equal, depending on the student's circumstances, of course.
Another question we've got, are you noticing an increasing emphasis on the interview video essay as a way to help admissions officers get to know students beyond what's on paper? Much of which, I think this is an interesting comment, much of which has often been redefined, edited. Is it yours? Really, right? And so this
Right.
authenticity piece of like, you're actually talking to the person.
Of course, of course. So the video interviews, the kind of, the video interviews came about in some ways because a lot of schools dropped their formal interview process during COVID. I mean, there were some video interview platforms beforehand, but they became more popular because students weren't always able to interview. So if they wanted another opportunity to sort of see the student and hear the student, this was this other method. And they want authentic 17-year-old voices, 100%. And you don't want to hire a Hollywood director for your admissions video. You definitely, it can be something with your phone. It can be taking through your day. I've seen some wonderful videos of just students, in their car, and their friend is kind of videoing them with their phone just to get to know who they are. It's 2 minutes, right? It's a 2-minute, in most cases, 90 seconds, 2 minutes snapshot of just kind of your personality and the things that you're most excited about. So please don't feel any pressure to have it be this professionally edited thing. In fact, I would say don't do that. Have it be something that is just very natural to you. Now, if you are a film studies student and you have those skills, by all means, you can showcase it in that format, but don't feel the pressure to do that otherwise.
Okay, another one. This is coming out. One of these questions is just making me think of some students that I met with this winter or last year, et cetera, is the APs, the number of APs, are there ever too many APs? And I'm saying that way, Lindsay, and I'm sure you probably have dealt with this too, is the holy grail of taking enough APs. I was meeting with some students earlier this year and asking them about, we were waiting for something, and I said, oh, what are you interested in? And literally I had a student say to me, I really haven't had an opportunity to explore my interests. I've taken too many, I've been very busy with schoolwork. And I said, oh, how many APs have you taken? And she was on number 7. Is there a point that you don't need to pursue this any further? What's your view on this?
So, I mean, what colleges care about is to see students challenging themselves and challenging, really what I sort of say is maxing out the rigor that your school offers is the first thing. So at some schools, you can't even take APs until senior year. At other schools, you can start taking APs sophomore year. So for students whose schools allow them to take AP courses earlier, they're going to have more AP courses, but that's not going to be detrimental to a student whose school doesn't allow them to take that number of APs. So what matters is that you are taking the most rigorous courses available to you at your school, but also maintaining your grades. And within that, I would say that, there are some, depending on your field, there are some AP courses that I would definitely strongly recommend and want a student to take. If a student's applying for chemistry, then they have AP Chem available to them in their school. They should take AP Chem. Does that mean that they need to take every other AP? No, but they should certainly take the most rigorous classes that they can to be able to, and also at the same time maintaining their grades. There are other things that kind of show that academic rigor, as I mentioned. So I don't want you to think of it as a race just for, oh, I took 12 AP classes, because again, it's a quality game. If you're taking AP classes and your grades are not strong, you should probably not take quite as many AP classes and think a little bit more about balance in your course selection.
Lindsay, we are at 8 o'clock. I'm so sorry. We have so many questions, and I think it's just an indication of, it's just hard to discern what should be happening and what you should do and other things. So I have a suspicion that we will be doing this again in the future, or at least I hope that we will. And for folks who are asking, we have recorded this. We will be sending this off to people. And I thank you all for joining us. And I know that Lindsay is happy to have folks reach out to her. And we are happy to have you reach out to us at EXPLO and try to answer your questions. I do want to thank Kate Barnes and Siley Reje, who helped us with production here tonight. And if you do have notions of other topics that you'd like us to cover, I have a suspicion we're going to continue on with college admissions going forward, since there are so many questions about this. And I thank you for sharing your evening with us. And Lindsay, this has been so helpful. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I think you have brought a little I hope help to people and comfort as we go into, people are going to be visiting colleges this summer, college trips and other things. And I wish you all the best for this evening and for the rest of the school year. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.